The phone screen illuminated his face in the darkness of his bedroom. 3 simple words stared back at him: I accept. Yes. David's heart stopped. The casual joke he'd made earlier that day, at this rate, I might as well marry you, suddenly wasn't a joke anymore. As a single father of 2 who'd sworn off relationships after his devastating divorce, he never imagined that Emma's midnight response would change the trajectory of his carefully controlled life. But sometimes, the most profound beginnings start with words we never meant to say. If you've ever wondered whether second chances at love are real, this story might just convince you. Like and subscribe to follow more stories that prove life's most beautiful moments often come when we least expect them. David Morgan stared at his phone, reading Emma's message for the 5th time. His palms were sweaty, his mouth dry. What had he done? It was just supposed to be a throwaway comment, the kind of harmless banter they developed over the months she'd been his daughter's art teacher. Now, at 12:47 a.m., those 3 words threatened everything he'd built. He set the phone down and glanced at the framed photo on his nightstand, him with Lily, 8, and Max, 11. Their faces smiled back at him, unaware that their father had just accidentally proposed to someone. The kids were finally adjusting to life after the divorce. 3 years of careful routine, of being both mother and father, of rebuilding their sense of security. And now this. David had met Emma Winters 9 months ago at a parent-teacher conference. She was new to Oak Ridge Elementary, taking over the art program mid-year. He'd noticed immediately how she spoke directly to Lily rather than over her head, how she'd brought out a portfolio of his daughter's work and pointed out specific strengths rather than generic praise. Lily, normally shy around strangers, had beamed with pride. Your daughter has an extraordinary eye for detail, Emma had told him. Most kids her age draw what they think they see. Lily draws what's actually there. It was the first time since the divorce that David had seen his daughter light up about something that wasn't related to her brother or him. Something that was just hers. The parent-teacher relationship had evolved gradually. First came the emails about Lily's progress, then casual conversations at pickup time. Emma had suggested a weekend art workshop that Lily might enjoy, and David had found himself volunteering to help. Somewhere between mixing paints and cleaning brushes, they'd started talking about things that had nothing to do with his daughter. Emma was 34, never married, and had moved to their small Connecticut town after 10 years teaching in Boston. She spoke about art with a passion that made even the most mundane subjects seem fascinating. She had a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was thinking and wore mismatched socks because she believed life was too short for perfect pairs. David hadn't realized how much he'd been sharing in return until Max had asked one night, "Dad, why do you talk about Ms. Winters so much?" The question had jolted him. He didn't talk about her that much, did he? But the knowing look on his 11-year-old's face suggested otherwise. Today had been Lily's birthday. Emma had stayed late after school to help David set up a surprise art party for his daughter and her friends. After the last child had been picked up, they'd collapsed onto the small chairs in the art room, surrounded by the creative chaos of 8-year-olds. "I can't thank you enough," David had said, watching Emma gather colorful scraps of paper from the floor. This meant everything to her. "It was my pleasure," Emma had replied, her smile tired but genuine. "Lily deserves it. You're doing an amazing job with her, David. With both of them." Something about the sincerity in her voice had cracked open a door he'd kept firmly shut. "I don't know about that. Half the time I feel like I'm failing them." "You're not," she'd said firmly. "Trust me, I see a lot of kids, a lot of parents. Your 2 are lucky. Well, they'd be even luckier if I could remember to buy groceries, help with homework, and still have time to plan birthday parties. At this rate, I might as well marry you, at least then someone would remember to buy milk before we run out." The words had tumbled out before he could stop them. He'd immediately tried to laugh it off, making a joke about his domestic incompetence. Emma had smiled too, though something had flickered across her face that he couldn't read. They'd parted ways normally enough. He'd gone home, put the kids to bed, cleaned up the kitchen, and fallen into his own bed, exhausted. And then her message had come. Now, David paced his bedroom, the hardwood floor cool beneath his bare feet. What was the protocol here? Should he call her? Wait until morning? Pretend his phone had died? He picked up the phone again and started typing, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. Finally, he wrote, "Emma, I think we need to talk. Can I call you?" Her response came immediately, as if she'd been waiting, "I'm still up." His hands shook slightly as he pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Hi," he replied, suddenly at a loss for words. "About what I said earlier." "And about what I said back," she finished for him. "Yeah." He sat on the edge of his bed. "I need to be honest with you, Emma. When I made that joke, I wasn't. I wasn't actually proposing." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. "I know that, David," she finally said, and he thought he detected a hint of amusement in her voice. "I didn't actually think you were proposing marriage in the middle of an elementary school art room while picking up birthday cake crumbs." Relief washed over him, followed immediately by confusion. "Then why did you say yes?" He heard her take a deep breath. "Because I wanted to tell you something, and your joke gave me an opening. I've been trying to find the right moment for weeks." "Tell me what?" "That I have feelings for you. Real ones. And I hope, you might have feelings for me too." The admission hung in the air between them. David closed his eyes, his heart hammering in his chest. The truth was, he did have feelings for her. Feelings he'd been carefully ignoring, categorizing as simple friendship, convincing himself that anything more was impossible, impractical, irresponsible. "I do," he admitted, the words barely audible. "But Emma, my kids." "I know," she said quickly. "I know they come first. They should come first. I would never want to disrupt what you've built with them." "It's not just that," David continued, finding his voice. "After what happened with Sarah, the divorce was brutal. Not just for me, but for them. Max still has nightmares sometimes. Lily went months barely speaking. I promised myself I wouldn't put them through anything like that again." "I understand," Emma said, and he could hear the resignation in her voice. "I shouldn't have said anything. We can just forget this happened." "No," David said, surprising himself with the forcefulness of his response. "No, I don't want to forget it happened. I need to be careful. For them." "What are you saying?" David took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I have feelings for you too. Strong ones. But if, and it's a big if, we were to explore this, it would have to be slow. Very slow. And the kids would have to be okay with it." "I can do slow," Emma said, and he could hear the smile returning to her voice. "I'm really good at slow, actually." "And David?" "I care about Lily and Max too. They're amazing kids. I would never want to hurt them." For the first time since receiving her message, David felt the tension in his shoulders begin to release. "So what now?" "Now," Emma said thoughtfully, "maybe we could start with coffee? Somewhere that isn't surrounded by children's artwork and birthday cake?" David laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised him with its ease. "I'd like that." "And David?" "Yes. Just so we're clear, I'm not actually expecting a wedding. Though I do expect you to buy your own milk." It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. Coffee led to lunch, lunch led to dinner, always carefully scheduled around the children's routines, always with clear boundaries. 2 months passed before David felt ready to tell Max and Lily that he and Ms. Winters were friends outside of school. Like boyfriend and girlfriend? Max had asked immediately, his face scrunched in that preteen expression of mild disgust. Like two adults who enjoy spending time together, David had corrected, though his ears had burned red at his son's directness. Lily had been quieter, processing the information in her thoughtful way. Later that night, she'd crawled into his bed and asked in a small voice, "If you like Ms. Winters, does that mean you don't love Mommy anymore?" The question had pierced David's heart. He'd pulled his daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I will always love your mom," he'd said carefully. "She gave me you and Max, and that makes her one of the most important people in my life. But sometimes grown-ups can't live together anymore, even when they care about each other. And sometimes, they find new people who make them happy in different ways." "Does Ms. Winters make you happy?" Lily had asked. "She does," David had admitted. "But you and Max make me happiest of all. Nothing will ever change that." Lily had considered this, her small fingers playing with the edge of his t-shirt. "She makes really good hot chocolate," she'd finally said. "With the tiny marshmallows." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was a start. The first time Emma came to their house for dinner was a disaster of epic proportions. Max had accidentally knocked over a full glass of soda, Lily had burst into tears when her art project wouldn't cooperate, and the smoke detector had gone off when David burned the garlic bread. Emma had taken it all in stride, helping clean up the spill, assisting Lily with her project, and running out to the store for replacement bread while David dealt with the smoke. Later, after the kids were in bed, they'd sat on his back porch, exhausted but laughing. "So that went well," David had said dryly. Emma had leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture so natural it made his heart ache. "Actually, it did. This is real life, David. Spills and tears and smoke detectors. I'm not looking for perfect." He'd turned to look at her then, this woman who had somehow slipped past all his defenses. "What are you looking for?" She'd met his gaze steadily. "This. You. Them. All of it." Their first kiss had happened right there on that porch, under a sky full of stars, with the distant sound of Max's music drifting through his bedroom window. It was tentative and brief, but it felt like coming home to a place David hadn't known he was missing. The months that followed weren't without challenges. Sarah, David's ex-wife, had initially been suspicious of Emma's role in her children's lives. There had been tense phone calls and uncomfortable exchanges at drop-offs. Max had gone through a phase of testing Emma's boundaries, seeing how far he could push before she'd get angry or give up. Lily had become clingy with David, afraid that this new relationship meant less time with her father. But slowly, steadily, they had found their rhythm. Emma never tried to replace Sarah, always respectful of her position as the children's mother. She developed her own relationships with Max and Lily, based on shared interests and genuine affection rather than forced familiarity. The night everything changed again was ordinary in every way. They were at Emma's apartment, the kids sprawled on her living room floor working on a complex Lego project she'd bought for them. David was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, watching the three of them through the pass-through window. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, patiently helping Lily sort through pieces while simultaneously admiring Max's engineering solutions. There was nothing particularly special about the moment. No grand gestures, no profound conversations, just the comfortable domesticity they'd built over the past year. And yet, watching them, David had been struck by a certainty so powerful it had nearly taken his breath away. This was his family. Not the one he'd planned for or expected, but the one he'd found nonetheless. That night, after they'd taken the kids home and put them to bed, David had turned to Emma in the hallway of his house and said, "Move in with us." Emma's eyes had widened. "What?" "Move in with us," he'd repeated, more confident this time. "I love you. The kids love you. This back and forth between two places is getting complicated. Let's just be together. Properly." Emma had stared at him for a long moment. Are you sure? What about taking it slow? It's been 14 months, David had pointed out. I think we've established that this isn't temporary. Unless, you don't want to. I want to, she'd said quickly. Of course I want to. But the kids? We'll talk to them together, David had said. If they're not ready, we'll wait. But Emma, I don't think they'll be surprised. You're already here most of the time anyway. To their surprise, the kids had taken the news better than expected. Max had been practical, immediately concerned with logistics like where Emma's books would go and whether they'd need to clean out the garage for her art supplies. Lily had been quietly pleased, confiding in Emma later that she'd already been telling her friends at school that Ms. Winters was part of their family. Sarah had been the most challenging hurdle. The idea of another woman living with her children had initially been difficult for her to accept. There had been tense conversations and a few tearful phone calls. But ultimately, seeing how happy Max and Lily were, how stable their new blended family had become, she'd given her blessing, albeit with plenty of continued input on parenting decisions. Emma moved in on a Saturday in June, 2 years after that fateful late-night message. The four of them had spent the day arranging her things, finding places for her books among David's, hanging her artwork on walls that had been bare for too long, integrating her life with theirs in tangible, visible ways. That evening, exhausted but content, they'd ordered pizza and eaten it picnic style on the living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Is it weird, Max had asked, reaching for another slice, that it doesn't feel weird? Like, Ms. Winters. Emma, she'd corrected gently. They'd agreed that now that she was living with them, the formality of Ms. Winters at home seemed unnecessary, though the kids could choose whatever made them comfortable. Emma, Max had tried, the name still awkward on his tongue. It's like you've always been here. Emma had smiled, her eyes suspiciously bright. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, David and Emma had sat on the back porch, their porch now, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss. Happy? David had asked, his arm around her shoulders. Beyond happy, she'd replied. Though I'm a little worried. About what? She'd turned to him with a mischievous smile. That joke you made about marrying me. Should I be concerned that you haven't followed through? David had laughed, pulling her closer. Are you proposing to me, Emma Winters? Maybe I am, she'd said, suddenly serious. We've done everything else backwards. Why not this too? David had looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. Ask me properly, then. Emma had taken his hands in hers, her eyes never leaving his. David Morgan, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and your children for the rest of our lives? The answer had been as inevitable as the sunrise. Yes, he'd said simply. Yes to all of it. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony in their backyard. Lily was the flower girl, scattering petals with artistic precision. Max, proud in his first suit, had carried the rings. Sarah had come with her new partner, their presence a testament to how far they'd all come in building this new, expanded family. As Emma and David had exchanged vows under an arch of flowers, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, David had thought back to that night 3 years ago, to the joke he'd made without thinking and the message that had changed everything. Sometimes, the most profound beginnings start with words we never meant to say. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those accidental words lead us exactly where we need to go. 5 years after that fateful message, David stood in the doorway of their living room, watching Emma help Lily with her high school art portfolio while Max, now 16, worked on coding a game at the dining table. The scene was so ordinary, so perfectly mundane, that it made his heart swell with gratitude. Their journey hadn't been without challenges. The first year of marriage had brought adjustments none of them had anticipated. Emma's mother had fallen ill, requiring frequent trips to Boston. Max had struggled with the transition to middle school, his grades slipping as he navigated new social pressures. Lily had gone through a phase of testing boundaries, perhaps sensing that the family's foundation was finally solid enough to withstand her pushing. There had been arguments, real ones, with raised voices and slammed doors. There had been nights when David had lain awake wondering if they'd moved too fast, if they'd been naive to think they could blend their lives so seamlessly. There had been moments when Emma had felt like an outsider in her own home, caught between being a parent and not being the children's mother. But for every difficult moment, there had been 100 small joys. The Sunday morning pancake traditions they'd established. The family camping trips where they'd all disconnected from technology and reconnected with each other. The art studio they'd built in the garage, where both Emma and Lily spent hours creating side by side. The way Max had gradually started coming to Emma with questions he found too embarrassing to ask his parents, a trust that had developed organically and meant the world to both of them. And then, 2 years into their marriage, had come the biggest surprise of all. Emma had approached David one evening after the kids were in bed, her expression a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "I need to tell you something," she'd said, sitting beside him on the couch. David had set aside his book, immediately concerned by her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she'd assured him quickly. "At least, I hope you won't think so." She'd taken a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words had hung in the air between them. They hadn't been trying for a baby, had, in fact, had several conversations about how their family felt complete as it was. David, at 42, had assumed his days of midnight feedings and diaper changes were behind him. "Say something," Emma had whispered when his silence had stretched too long. David had reached for her hands, his mind racing. "Are you happy about this?" he'd asked carefully. Emma's eyes had filled with tears. "I am. I know we didn't plan it, and I know the timing isn't ideal with my new position at the school, but David, yes. I'm happy. But I need to know if you are too." He'd pulled her into his arms then, his own eyes damp. "Of course I am," he'd said, and been surprised to discover it was absolutely true. "We're having a baby." Telling Max and Lily had been its own adventure. They'd sat the children down for a family meeting, prepared for any reaction. "We have some news," David had begun, reaching for Emma's hand. "Emma and I are going to have a baby. You're going to have a little brother or sister." Max, 13 by then, had looked between them with wide eyes. "For real? Like, an actual baby?" "An actual baby," Emma had confirmed, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "Cool," Max had said after a moment's consideration. "Can I teach it to play video games?" Eventually, David had laughed, relief washing over him. "What about you, Lily? What do you think?" Lily, 10 and increasingly thoughtful, had been quiet for a moment. "Will you still have time for us?" she'd finally asked, her voice small. Emma had moved to kneel in front of her stepdaughter, taking her hands. "Lily, listen to me. Having this baby doesn't mean I'll love you any less. Your dad and I will always, always have time for you and Max. You two were my first children, even if not by birth. This baby will just be one more person for all of us to love." Lily had considered this, her expression serious. "Can I help decorate the baby's room? With art and stuff?" "I can't think of anyone better for the job," Emma had said sincerely. Olivia Morgan had been born on a snowy January morning, pink and perfect and loud. From the moment they'd brought her home, she had been adored by her older siblings. Max had appointed himself her official protector, scrutinizing any visitor who wanted to hold her. Lily had spent hours just watching her sleep, occasionally sketching her tiny features with a tenderness that made Emma cry when she discovered the drawings. Now, at 2 years old, Olivia was the undisputed center of their universe, a toddling whirlwind with Emma's artistic temperament and David's stubborn determination. She had somehow managed to wrap all of them around her tiny finger, even Sarah, who had surprised everyone by becoming a doting aunt figure in the little girl's life. As David watched his family from the doorway, Olivia noticed him first, her face lighting up with that special smile reserved just for him. "Daddy," she squealed, abandoning her blocks to run toward him on unsteady legs. He scooped her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair as she wrapped her arms around his neck. The simple weight of her in his arms still amazed him sometimes, this miracle they hadn't planned for but couldn't imagine living without. Emma looked up from Lily's artwork, her smile soft and knowing. After 7 years together, she could read his nostalgic moods like a book. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's perfect," he replied, and meant it. Later that night, after the children were asleep, David and Emma sat on their back porch, a tradition they'd maintained through all the changes in their lives. The spring air was cool but not cold, fragrant with the scent of the garden they'd planted together. "I was thinking about that night," David said, his fingers laced with Emma's. "The night you sent that message." Emma laughed softly. "The night I terrified you, you mean?" "You did terrify me," he admitted. "But in the best possible way." "Would you have ever made a move if I hadn't?" she asked, genuinely curious. David considered this. "Eventually, maybe. But I was so afraid of disrupting the kids' lives, of making another mistake. I might have let you slip away." "Well, thank goodness for ill-timed jokes and impulsive text messages, then," Emma said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank goodness," David agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sound of a neighbor's wind chimes and the occasional car passing on their quiet street. "Do you ever wonder," Emma asked eventually, "what our lives would be like if you hadn't made that joke? Or if I hadn't sent that message?" "Sometimes," David admitted. "But then I look at our family, at Max becoming this incredible young man, at Lily finding her voice through her art, at Olivia and all the joy she brings, and I can't imagine any other path that could have led us here." Emma squeezed his hand. "Me neither." As they sat together under the vast expanse of stars, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a casual joke to a late-night message, from cautious beginnings to the rich, complex tapestry of their blended family. None of it had been easy. All of it had been worth it. Sometimes life's most profound beginnings start with words we never meant to say. Sometimes the most unexpected messages lead us exactly where we need to go. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to answer, we find ourselves exactly where we belong. In the quiet of their backyard, surrounded by the home they'd built together, David and Emma sat hand in hand, grateful for the joke that had changed everything and the courage they'd found to see where it might lead. If you've been touched by David and Emma's journey, remember that love often finds us when we least expect it, and sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin with the words we never planned to say. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us second chances are real, and that families come in all shapes and sizes, built not just by blood but by choice, by commitment, and by love that grows stronger with each passing day.